Welcome to the Unlist. Today, I'm doing the unthinkable. I'm committing an entire video to one fragrance. Not only that, but it's a vintage fragrance, which means audience will narrow down further, and discontinued fragrance. That's probably expensive, so then the audience narrows down even further. So I've compounded all my sins on top of each other, and then to put insult to injury, I am also coming out here in a t-shirt and a baseball cap. I'm not wearing a dress shirt or a blazer. I don't have a Rolex watch. I'm not trying to give you dietary advice or exercise advice or any other kind of lifestyle crap, because you didn't sign up for that, and I'm not here to give you that. And honestly, I'm not here to receive any of that either. So we're all in good hands. If this is what you're here for, you're in the right place. If you're here to have someone tell you how to lay pipe better, how to fill your bank account better, how to increase your number of push-ups in the morning, I don't know what to tell you, man. That's not my concern. So anyhow, the fragrance is JHL by Aramis, released in 1982. So this is a special fragrance for me, which is why I am devoting a whole video to it, obviously. And it also has a special place in Estée Lauder history, the parent company of Aramis. And that's because this is the fragrance that Estée Lauder made for her husband, the late Joseph Harold Lauder, whose initials form the name of the fragrance, JHL, Joseph Harold Lauder. Now, you may also notice that the fragrance says custom blended cologne on the label. Well, that is no claptrap. That is legitimate. This was originally a bespoke fragrance made just for the use of Joseph Harold Lauder, and he wore it. Now, his wife Estée also had her own custom fragrance. It wasn't Estée, you might be thinking. No, Estée and Estée Super were not her custom fragrance. Her custom fragrance was actually Private Collection, hence the name Private Collection. And both Private Collection and JHL were not released to the public, although Private Collection did get released first in 1973. Some of that might be in response to Chanel No. 19, as it was also originally a custom fragrance for Gabrielle Chanel, although she only got to use it for a year before she passed away, and then it was released to the public. So I feel like that was a case of trying to keep up with the Joneses, right? Okay, well, they put out a previously custom fragrance. Now I've got to put one out, so I'll put mine out. Thus, Private Collection hit the market. However, Joseph Harold Lauder was a much less public figure than his wife, so he could afford to not share. Didn't have to share his fragrance. There was no gain for him to put his fragrance on the market. However, it eventually did. It eventually did hit the market. And coincidentally, it hit the market in 82, and he would pass away a year later in 83. So it's a little bit spooky if you think about it, since number 19 came out a year after Chanel's death, and then Joseph Harold Lauder's fragrance, JHL, came out a year before his, released to the public. So the big thing about this fragrance, besides all of that stuff, is what it smells like, honestly. So when you smell this fragrance, the first thing you might notice, if you're well versed in fragrances from that period, is it doesn't really smell very much like an early 80s fragrance. And it doesn't really honestly smell all that much like a 70s fragrance either. When you smell JHL, it throws you all the way back to the classic ambers of the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. So we're talking stuff like Taboo by Dana, and also stuff like what? Estée Lauder Youth Dew from 1953. Early American Old Spice by Schulten from 37, okay? This fragrance really has more in common with those heavy, spicy, musky, gummy style ambers than anything that was currently happening in the men's market space in 1982. Some people will say that this fragrance is a men's take on Cinnabar, and I myself have also echoed that sentiment. But the more I think about it and the more I wear this fragrance and compare it to others, I feel like it has more of a direct link to Youth Dew. And that is because Cinnabar was trying to directly compete with opium. Estée Lauder went actually on record as saying that she felt like opium was just Youth Dew with a tassel. So Cinnabar was her attempt to, I guess, retake back the thunder that Yves Saint Laurent stole from her by releasing opium. That's how she saw it anyway. He was eating her lunch and he didn't like that. She didn't like that. He was eating her lunch and she didn't like that. So this fragrance feels a bit older in style than Cinnabar, which Cinnabar is more of that contemporary Oriental revival. So it's spicier, it's drier, it has more to do with incense, okay? This fragrance, on the other hand, feels more of a relation to Youth Dew because it's more about patchouli, it's more about amber, it's more about musk profile. It has civet, it has tonka tone in here. It's more about the indolic, fatty, musky, jasmine, ylang notes, the rose, the carnation, of course, all that stuff, aldehydes, very 50s, very 60s, not very 80s, not very 70s. And the perfumers who worked on this are none other than Josephine Catapano, who helped create both Cinnabar and Youth Dew, and Bernard Chant, who was known to create all of the Aramis fragrances up until this point. He made the original Aramis scent when Aramis was still an Estée Lauder fragrance in '64, which he based notoriously off of his formula for Parfum Gray. Cabochard de Gray became Aramis. Then he did the same thing again with Aramis 900, which was based off of Aromatics Elixir by Clinique. Devon was a bit of a Frankenstein. Devon was a little bit alliage, a little bit azuré mixed together. So it's kind of a hodgepodge of those two. But it worked really well. Devon was kind of an attempt to compete with Polo, right? Estée Lauder has always used the Aramis division to kind of fire back at other brands. Whenever another house makes a fragrance that makes waves, Aramis has got to do their own thing that smells like it. So, 900 was basically firing back at Eau Sauvage. Devon was firing back at Polo. Aramis wasn't really firing back at anything, but it was also the first. So you can't really say that was firing back. That was the first one. But after that first one, they were all clapbacks. Every Aramis fragrance was basically a clapback. Tuscany was a clapback at Azzaro Pour Homme. New West was a clapback at Drakkar Noir, and to an extent Cool Water, which came out the same year. Havana was also a clapback at stuff like Montana, okay, opened by Roger and Gallet. So these are all clapbacks. That's what Aramis was basically used for. To go, oh yeah, you're going to do that? Well, here's ours. So screw you. Here's ours. We got ours now, right? That's just how the game was played with that division, okay? No surprise that they eventually got shut down because they lost their way. They lost their relevance since all of the Aramis fragrances were designed for a different type of male taste that doesn't exist as much these days. That refined, cognac sipping, smokers, jacket wearing, listens to classic jazz, drives a Jag, smokes a cigar. That continental stereotype with the long cigarette holder, right? Let's drink some champagne, that whole Christopher Walken vibe. That's the kind of vibe that Aramis was giving off. And that's what gangsters and pimps and people like that are into. So while there's a market for that, clearly there's a market for that, the market for that has been shrinking. Because guys are more sporty and athletic, and we play video games, and we go to raves and stuff, and we drive Teslas now, and it's all about that stuff, that exuberant boyishness that kind of lasts forever. We're not into that mature, gentlemanly kind of thing anymore. That's not a thing that sells. So ultimately, Aramis was put out the pasture. And it's one of the reasons why this fragrance, sadly, was put out to pasture, since it didn't really have much of an audience anymore after it came out. However, I really enjoy it. I mean, it is, in my opinion, a male interpretation of Youth Dew, although I also think it may, to an extent, be a male interpretation of Cinnabar as well. I'm not going to say that my recent revelation concerning this fragrance has made me change my mind about it. There's a bit of Cinnabar in here, but I feel like there's a larger portion of Youth Dew in this. Considering that Josephine Catapano didn't really make men's fragrances, okay, she wasn't known for doing that, doesn't really have any men's fragrances under her portfolio at all. I feel like they basically had her work on this, and then when she realized that she couldn't make it work out because she's not really into men's fragrances, the buck was passed along to Bernard Chant, who then completed it. You know, he completed it, and then it came out. So this is a collaborative effort between Bernard Chant and Josephine Catapano, both legendary IFF perfumers. And you have to remember, Estée Lauder used IFF exclusively used IFF until the end of the 80s, okay? When those old IFF perfumers retired, which were Estée Lauder's buddies, she was friends with them, when they retired, she had no real incentive to really learn the new blood, to get the new perfumers, so she just started to, you know, Givaudan and Firmenich, and they all started getting contracts from Estée Lauder. But for those first few decades, it was IFF or nothing, okay? It was all IFF all the time. All those fragrances were produced by Catapano, Chant. Vincent Marcello did private collection, so all IFF perfumers all the way through. Now, sadly, this one is discontinued, as I mentioned earlier, and it's been discontinued for a while. It was always a rare bird originally. Its original bottle was shaped like a cognac bottle, and this pattern you see around the label was designed to look like Joseph's favorite smoking jacket, the pattern of his smoking jacket. Well, that original fragrance was like private collection, very limited retail footprint, very hard to find and more expensive than other Aramis fragrances. It was meant to be special. You didn't just wear it to work every day. It was a special fragrance. Hence all this stuff about being custom and all that, right? When they released the Gentleman's Collection in 2009, and this was included in that collection, it sold out almost right away. The other 5 fragrances, 900, Devon, New West, okay, Tuscany, Havana, they lingered on the market for a while. Some of them eventually would run dry. I mean, Tuscany would run out first, and then Havana would start running out next. But you can still get New West and 900 for okay prices. But this one blew out almost immediately. And then in very quick form, it was too much money on eBay. And when I bought my bottles, they were already too much money. But when I bought these, they were about $125, which is 50% above what they sold for. They were like 75, 80 bucks. So another 30, 40 bucks on top of that is what I paid for my 2. And that was overpaying back then. But you go look at the prices on these now, and I don't mean the old bottles, I mean these bottles, these reissue bottles, still $275, $375, $400 fucking dollars. Ridiculous, man. Completely insane, over the top, not worth it. And the reason why I say not worth it is you could just wear Youth Dew. I wore Youth Dew last night, and then I wore this right behind it, back to back. And there is not a ton of difference. There isn't. Youth Dew has more patchouli. It has more civet. It's a little bit sharper. Okay, a little more on the green side of things. Okay. This is more on the amber side, on the gummy, the benzoin side. The musk profile on this is a bit rounder, not as sharp. It's not as Uranus. It's more about tonkatone, that deer musk. Okay. So this is a bit more, I don't want to say tame. This is still a very musky fragrance, but this is a little more soft-spoken, which is not saying much because they're both loud. They're both very loud fragrances. Youth Dew is a subwoofer, and this is a subwoofer too. But the Youth Dew is like a car subwoofer, and this is like a house subwoofer. So one will get you in trouble with the police a lot easier than the other, depending on where you live. Okay. There's no doubt about it. They're both loud fragrances. But if you like this, then just go check out any other old school classic amber fragrances. Gender doesn't matter, okay? If you want to mess with some Dana Taboo, go ahead and do it. If you want to mess with some vintage Old Spice or early American Old Spice, go ahead and do it. If you want to get Royal Spice by Royal Lima Bermuda, go ahead and grab a bottle. That's really nice too, okay? Bird of Paradise by Avon, comparable fragrance. Tabac by Mauer and Wirtz, also comparable fragrance. All right. Unforgettable by Avon, same thing. Revlon has a fragrance called Ciara. You can mess with some Revlon Ciara, another really gummy, ambery, spicy, musky fragrance. And then, of course, after this came out, we would see Calvin Klein release the men's version of Obsession. So Obsession for men and JHL could almost hold hands. Almost. The key difference is Obsession for men has lavender. It doesn't play with rose. It doesn't play with carnation. Doesn't play with jasmine. It goes the fougere route. It takes this structure and fougerifies it. It removes the rose. It removes the jasmine indoles. It removes the carnation. And instead, you get the same aldehyde profile up top, but then you get the lavender, and there's also a lot of other incense notes. The musk profile is a little bit fattier, again, a little more smooth, rich, almost like this fragrance is kind of a missing link between something like a Youth Dew and something like Obsession. Sits in the middle. So that's how I look at it. The best way to rationalize it. It's a half step forward between the two. So Obsession is all spice, all smooth. Youth Dew is all floral, all musk, all green. This is somewhere smack dab in the center. So that sounds good to you and you have the money to spend on this, because you're not going to be able to sample it. Unless you got a rich friend, you're not going to be able to sample it. So, or you can buy a mini. Minis exist. That's a less painful way to explore some of these unicorn fragrances. But there you have it, guys. Joseph Harold Lauder, JHL, by the former house of Aramis. And it's a good fragrance, fairly unique. It feels like a scent out of time, and I enjoy wearing it, especially in the colder months. Thanks for watching.